wherever you are in the world, whatever time of day it is. I hope you are doing well. Thank you to Independent Left News for letting me stream onto their YouTube and Twitch, and there was another platform. Oh, frick. That's not good. He did that. Fix it. Hopefully we're hearing an echo there. This is why. It's because I had it on here. Boom. There we go. Perfect. Okay, that should be better now. The echo should be gone, and it appears that it is. Awesome. So today I'm going to be talking about this amazing book right here. Oh, before I get started, I give shout outs to the 2 Uber comrades on Patreon supporting my channel, my partner, thank you, Rosa, and Independent Left News, which is this channel, obviously. So this book, Riding the Wave, Sweden's Integration into the Imperialist World System by, my hand there, Torkel Lawson. I'm not sure how I actually came across this book, but I am super happy that I did, frankly, because it's just chocked full of so much amazing information and kind of an insight and perspective, one that I was kind of completely unaware of, frankly. And yeah, so I highly recommend this book. I'm about halfway through it at this point, about 115 pages through, and it's slightly over 200 pages, and just really interesting. So in the introduction, Torkel Lawson, and my apologies if I'm butchering any of these, Nordic or Scandinavian names. Please let me know if I am. And then, so the introduction here, let's see. Here we go. So he's talking about how Sweden became a part of the imperialist core, how it tried to be a significant European colonial power, but was outmaneuvered by the great colonial powers. He also talks about how Sweden in particular and some of these other European countries didn't necessarily have the necessary kind of infrastructure in order to be, to become a great colonial power, such as, Belgium or Germany. And that's why they had to ride the wave or ride the coattails of these other countries through, colonialism, and then through, neocolonialism after that. And in particular, Germany and Belgium played a pretty large role with Sweden. Sweden riding their imperial colonial coattails in order to, enrich Sweden, while still, engaging in some really, atrocious behaviors outside the borders of Sweden. But through that, them riding that wave of imperialism, of colonialism, they were able to develop a highly, sophisticated welfare state, still capitalist, but, very high standards of living. These social democrats have been in power on and off for, decades in Sweden. So it's very, very interesting, just kind of all around this topic and, discussion from my perspective. Oh, cool. They're saying it works. I just got a message from Independent Left News. Perfect. Awesome. Cool. But let's see. Here we go. Okay. Do we have... Okay. No comments yet, but look at that. That's kind of interesting, huh? Okay, what's the next page? So this is pretty interesting. Let's see. Oh, yes. So this is talking about how, in fact, Sweden, they didn't manage to become a major slave trader or anything like that. But that doesn't mean they weren't complicit in the slave trade. So, for example, Torkel Lassen points out, this is on page 16, it was actually Swedish chains and bars on Danish ships. Those are made of Swedish iron, because Sweden was the leading European exporter of iron in the 17th century. And then iron was also involved in this kind of colonial triangular trade, as Torkel Lassen talks about, between Africa, America, and Europe. So iron, which again was a huge export from Sweden at the time, was used as a trading currency to buy slaves in Africa. And then obviously for the production of the chains and bars to keep the slaves locked up, while they were, transported, in these just brutal, heinous conditions to, wherever they were going to be enslaved at in the world. And then for tools and farming in the colony. So that's the kind of colonial triangulation of trade that, that Torkel Lassen was talking about. So they weren't directly enslaving people, but, the Swedish exports played still a pretty significant role in the slave trade process. And then also he talks about the forced labor and recruitment of the Sami people in. So they were basically in. So it's the modern day kind of northern part of Sweden. At the time, this was, in the 1700s. It was a very, kind of remote territory inhabited by the Sami and their herds of reindeer. But the Sami people, they were forcibly recruited to transport the silver ore to the south that had been discovered in that region. So it was kind of this first big industrial project in the region, and signaled kind of the beginning of the colonization of, the Sami territory in the northern part of Sweden. Again, this was kind of in the beginning of the 1700s. Basically, and just how they were used for kind of cheap labor in order to, enrich the country. And then they also Sweden also colonized areas in the Baltic region in the 17th century. So pretty long, history of Sweden, riding the, imperial coattails of, more colonial powers of Germany in particular, but also, Belgium as well. So, and then Torkel is going on to talk about, it's basically imperialism without colonies, what Sweden, had at the time, and kind of still kind of exhibits to this day, frankly. And then this was also very interesting. So this, it kind of feels like this is a quote in here, page 22, from the late Prime Minister of the Cape Colony in South Africa, Cecil Rhodes, who is describing the situation or the importance of imperialism. I was in the East End of London, a working class quarter, yesterday, and attended a meeting of the unemployed. I listened to the wild speeches, which were just a cry for bread. And on my way home, I wandered over the scene and became more than ever convinced, that right there, of the importance of imperialism. My cherished idea is a solution for the social problem, i.e., in order to save the 400,000 inhabitants of the UK from a bloody civil war, we colonial statesmen must acquire new lands to settle the surplus population to provide new markets for the goods produced in the factories and mines. The empire, as I've always said, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid a civil war, you must become imperialist. So what, Cecil Rhodes was saying right there is that basically, we need to jump on this imperialist bandwagon as much as possible, because then we'll be able to, exploit these countries overseas, bring back the wealth, to the imperial core, and we'll be able to, subdue some of the social unrest that might be existing in our country through this, imperial exploitation of people and lands overseas. So pretty interesting point, right? How imperialism or colonialism or neocolonialism could be used to basically, subdue or try to, extinguish any type of social unrest that might be, existing in that home country, right? So pretty interesting. Let's see. Okay. And then let's see, what was I going to talk about next? Yeah, so this whole idea also of emigration from Sweden to the U.S. also helped. Well, not just Sweden, but he's talking about Northwestern Europe in particular, how emigration to the U.S. from these Northwestern European countries really helped to reduce the reserve army of labor. Again, so less people fighting for more jobs and wages and stuff like that in Sweden due to emigration or these other countries. Yeah, and then it talks about the Congo Conference that happened in Berlin in the late 1800s, I believe, where basically these colonial powers carved out Africa for colonial plunder, and but Sweden was left out of this. They didn't actually get a colony or colonies in Africa for themselves, but Sweden's top representative at this Berlin conference, again, this Berlin conference was all about carving up Africa for these colonial powers and figuring out who exactly was going to get what. Sweden didn't manage to get any colonies at the conference, but they did endorse they endorsed the division of the colonies at the conference adopted by the major colonial powers. So they were completely ready and willing to go along with Belgium or Germany or whoever else was colonizing Africa at the time. And they probably frankly would have been pretty happy to get a colony or colonies themselves. Didn't work out that way. So again, this is another example of why they had to ride the wave of imperialism, because they didn't have any colonies themselves, but they were completely willing to support these colonial powers in Africa, particularly Germany and to a lesser extent Belgium. And obviously both really, really horrible examples. Just real quick, let's look at a little bit of the just carnage and horror that Belgium under King Leopold unleashed on the Congo and the people there. It's brutal to say the very least. So this is what they did to some of the people, including children there, like literally chopping off their hands. As punishment. Colonial officials amputated and mutilated Congolese people, including children, as punishment. Again, this was being done by Belgium. Sweden was in support of this. Again, this was the Berlin Conference, as I was talking about earlier, that divided up, Africa for these colonial powers. I mean, Christ, dude. I mean, like, right, cut off right at the. Oh, Jesus Christ, dude. Wow. It's wow. A man sits on a low platform looking at a dismembered small foot and small hand. They belong to his 5-year-old daughter, who was later killed when her village did not produce sufficient rubber. She was not unique. Chopping off limbs of enslaved Congolese was a routine form of retribution when Leopold's II quotas were not met. So again, this is how a lot of these European powers were able to generate so much wealth and income, enriching, the homeland while completely exploiting, these colonies, Congo in this case, literally chopping off children's arms if the village or the town or whatnot did not meet the quotas for rubber, for example. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's just the level of horror and atrocities committed in the Congo by Belgium is almost unthinkable, right? Look at Jesus Christ. Congolese people were forced to be human exhibits in a zoo in Belgium in 1897. Jesus Christ, dude. Obviously, none of the colonial powers were, humanitarians or obviously interested in the well-being of the people they're colonizing. They were all doing it for their own purposes to, enrich the homeland or themselves. But King Leopold II, Belgium, his his rule was so cruel that other European leaders condemned what Belgium was doing to the people in Congo. So this is just a little bit of background of what was happening, to the Congolese people. And again, that was being done by Belgium, but this was something that, Sweden and the leaders at the time were in complete, support of. So just a little bit of background I wanted to give on that. Okay, yeah. So and just there's basically 10 million people were, murdered in the genocide by Belgium in the Congo. So not something you often, hear about is what, Belgium did to the people of the, Congo. And then page 32, Torkel Lawson's talking about how Sweden's main strategy, however, was to strengthen its ties with Germany by supporting their position at this Berlin conference. Let's see. So yeah, Germany was building a sizable merchant and navy fleet in the 1890s, established naval bases as far as the south coast of China, very active kind of different parts of the world. And Sweden wanted to jump right on that in order to be able to enrich themselves at home while participating in this these colonial conquests, whether it was supporting what Belgium was doing or to a larger extent Germany. So this is also pretty interesting. It was in this page 33. It was in this colonial context that the idea of the German Herrenvolk, probably butchering that, or master race developed. The basic elements of Nazi race theory were developed during this period and practiced in Southwest Africa, present-day Namibia. However, it would be a mistake to label German colonialism as especially brutal. English, French, Dutch, and Belgian colonialism were no less so. The racism, national chauvinism, and brutality of Nazism were later condemned by other European powers, but as poet and politician Aimé Césaire, again, apologize if I'm mispronouncing any of these names or words, wrote, yes, it would be worthwhile to study clinically in detail the steps taken by Hitler and Hitlerism and to reveal to the very distinguished, very humanistic, very Christian bourgeoisie. I had for a while, I had the hardest time figuring out how to pronounce that word bourgeoisie. That was a while ago, but anyways. The very Christian bourgeoisie of the 20th century without his being aware of it. he has a Hitler inside him, that Hitler inhabits him, that Hitler is his demon, that if he rails against him, he is being inconsistent. And that at the bottom, what he cannot forgive Hitler for is not crime in itself, the crime against man. It is not the humiliation of man as such. It is the crime against the white man, the humiliation of the white man, and the fact that it applied to European colonialist procedures, which until then had been reserved exclusively for the Arabs of Algeria, the coolies of India, and of Africa. So he's basically, pointing out that, this type of behavior was all well and good as long as it was being used on people outside of Europe, people that didn't look like them. So totally fine, exploit, brutalize people in India or people in Africa or people in Algeria. That's fine, but he started doing it to people that look like us, Europeans. Went too far there. So I think that's pretty interesting, right? In parallel with the expansion of the colonial empires, there developed the idea of Europe as the historical cradle and center of civilization. Well, it's not true. I mean, that was the humans came out of Africa, right? The myth imagined 1,000-year continuing from ancient Greece's philosophy and culture to liberal values of Western capitalism. In actual fact, however, it was not until the Renaissance and the dawn of capitalism that Europe began to cultivate the idea of Greek antiquity as its origin. Let's see. Hello. Cool. And then, okay, what's the next page I dog-eared here? Let's see. Oh, this is also kind of interesting, I thought, too. So early, this is talking about page 42, early Swedish industrial enterprise, Bofors Bruck. Bofors had refined iron and manufactured weapons since 1646, a long time. And then it was actually bought at one point by Alfred Nobel, who again, this is all in Sweden, modernized arms production, and expanded it to include various types of explosives, especially his invention dynamite. And yes, he also established the Nobel Prize in 1895, which is kind of interesting, right? The Nobel Peace Prize, it's one of the Nobel Prizes, right? Nobel Peace Prize was actually created by Alfred Nobel, who manufactured weapons and explosives and dynamite in particular. I just think that is the contradiction there is very, very interesting, right? Then page 44, Torkel Lassen's talking about the 1890s in many ways were a turning point in Sweden's history. In the breakthrough of industrial capitalism, created many new jobs, massive emigration, removed that reserve, army of labor, whether, a lot of folks from Sweden emigrated to the US at that time. And as a result, the population dipped down a bit in Sweden. So there's less people competing, for the same amount of jobs. And then the Swedish, Social Democratic Party, so SOCDEM, Social Democrats, was established, and the foundations for the, kind of welfare state were enacted, at that point, basically. So pretty interesting, right? Let's see. So that was, kind of in the 1890s, this was all going on. Let's see. Then talking about how the wages were kind of rising in Sweden at that time, but the rising wages only impacted a small fraction of the working class, being limited to the kind of higher skilled and best organized industrial workers. And then, by the turn of the century, so by 1900, widespread hunger, as we still see today. And unfortunately, a lot of these, exploited countries still exist. That widespread hunger had disappeared from Western Europe at that point. You could obviously say that's in large part due to, imperialism and their colonialist, pursuits, basically, right? I think earlier in the book, it talked about how I believe South America, it was the figure was just staggering, the amount of silver that was, stolen from South America and transported back, to Europe. That's going to obviously really increase the wealth of those countries when you're exporting tons or hundreds of tons, however much it was, silver, taking that out of South America, bringing that back, to Europe. Let's see. So, and then it's talking about the biopolitics. Biopolitics, I think that is something that we should really focus on. And if you only take one thing away from all the stuff I'm talking about, sometimes not super coherently, is this idea of biopolitics. So biopolitics, this is page 51, meant that the welfare of the citizens of one nation spelled death and misery for those of another. So we, can see that that's what happened, to the people in Congo. The welfare of people in Belgium increased substantially. That also coincided with 10 million plus people in Congo being killed, murdered, brutalized, and exploited in every way possible. So this biopolitics really, I feel like, kind of sums up, what was going on and what continues to go on through, present day imperialism, right? So then he quotes Mark G. E. Kelly, calls biopolitical imperialism, and I'm going to read this paragraph because I think it really speaks to what I was just highlighting. One might imagine that biopolitical imperialism would mean a flow of biopolitics itself outward into the periphery. I argue that though some movement in this direction does exist, it is not the main way in which biopolitical imperialism operates. Imperialism is a form of power that by and large does not care about the lives of its victims. See Congo and what I showed you earlier, right? Imperialism, therefore, is primarily thanta-political, a politics of death, contrasting with the biopolitics of the population found in the imperial metropole, or what I would say, the imperial core. There is, I contend, a direct relation between the two things, in which death is figuratively exported and life imported back, in a systematic degradation of the possibilities for biopolitics in the periphery, rising out of the operation of biopolitics in the center. And I don't think there's, any evidence, frankly, to argue against that, right? When these colonialist powers, when these imperialist powers are, coming into these countries to exploit them, they're not bringing, sunshine and lollipops with them. They're doing it through, death, mutilation, murder, repression, etc. That's that, that politics of death that is being exported while, life and resources are being transported back to the imperial core. I think that's a very, important point to really highlight and hold on to, frankly. And then so he's citing number of examples of this biopolitical imperialism. So One example was the massive export of food that took place from India to Britain, even while the people of India were, I mean, just that, how completely just disgusting and inhumane on every level is that Britain, this colonial power, at that time, particular time period they reference was 1875 to 1900, included the worst famines in the history of India. Annual grain exports increased from 3 to 10 million tons while this massive famine was plaguing the country. That is that biopolitics of death. I mean, literally exporting food during a famine from India while, I mean, Jesus Christ, right? Which, the amount of food that they were exporting from India equivalent to the annual nutrition of 25 million people being exported from the periphery to the imperial core in Britain. It's nuts, right? That's just disgusting. Indeed, by the turn of the century, India was supplying nearly a fifth of Britain's wheat consumption at the cost of its own food security. During the famine of 1899 to 1900, when 145 Bararis died directly from starvation, the province exported not only thousands of bales of cotton, but an incredible 747,000 bushels of grain. Boom. And then he's talking about the idea of the, capitalist state, capitalist welfare state didn't originate in Sweden, but in Germany, in the capitalist regime of Otto von Bismarck. And then also, kind of the idea too that's, mentioned a few times in this book is, the social democrats, some of them, siding with the interest of capital against the more revolutionary, elements within the party, forming, a coalition with capital and the bourgeoisie in order to, stop a potential revolutionary movement in the country, Sweden or otherwise, and then the more radical revolutionary elements kind of opting out because they didn't want to, make that compromise because they actually wanted a, socialist state and country to exist. Because again, you know, Sweden, all these Scandinavian Nordic countries are not Swedish. They are capitalist welfare states to one extent or the other. And again, obviously, they have higher standards of living than, let's say, the United States because they have things like universal health care, maternity, paternity leave, paid time off, paid sick leave, maybe universal higher education, things like that. But again, they were able to, generate the wealth and resources to provide, that capitalist welfare state through, imperialism, through that politics of death, right? Let's see. Here we go. Yeah, so 1889, Swedish Social Democratic Party, officially the Social Democratic Workers' Party of Sweden, the Suffragists Social Demokratiska Arbeiderparti, or SAP. Let's just say SAP because I definitely butchered that. Was formed with the support of the trade union movement. And that's also been, kind of part of Sweden's history was that, the Social Democratic Party, or the SAP, the acronym, they were working, pretty closely and have been with the trade union movement in that country, not necessarily always agreeing on everything, but the kind of role of the Social Democratic Party in Sweden, I would think probably in these other, capitalist welfare states, is basically to try to work out the differences that exist between the workers and the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, in order to make sure things go as smoothly as possible, so that there's no major labor disruptions or anything like that, just to kind of smooth things over, to make sure the system runs as it should, right? So that's pretty interesting. Let's see. Oh yeah, then it's talking about, let's see. Okay, here we go. So the Swedish folkhemmet, the people's home, inspired by Bismarck's German state, folkhemmet would become a core concept in the ideology of the Swedish Social Democrats. So that's pretty interesting. Let's see. Okay, yep. So then this is page 60, talking about how Sweden, in fact, was not unaffected by this split between the Social Democrats and the Communists that developed in the years before the First World War. So that's, again, pretty interesting. The Social Democrats tended to side with capital and just wanting to reform the system to establish this social welfare state, but they wanted to keep capitalism in place. They were fine with the profit motive. They just thought that it should be capitalism with a human face, which is what Sweden and these Nordic or Scandinavian countries are often referred to as being as capitalism with a human face. You still have capitalism, you still have profit, the profit motive as reigning supreme, but you're not going to have necessarily the level of exploitation or inequality as far as wealth or income goes that maybe you would have in some place like the United States. But again, Sweden was able to develop this highly developed capitalist welfare state through riding this wave of imperialism, right? So that's pretty interesting. Yeah, and he's talking about how Lenin saw the possibility of socialist revolution in the weakest link of European capitalism, and then hoped that would lead to revolutions taking place in more developed European countries. And then he was obviously, proved right to a certain extent with the, Russian Revolution and the establishment of the USSR, right? Let's see. They're talking about a civil war in Finland. And then the king of the Swedish king, liberal social democratic government declared that Sweden was neutral in the Civil War. But they were actually, extending covert support during that time, even, lending, troops and everything to that civil war. And then Sweden was able to, keep kind of continuing to develop after the First World War, and then, towards the Second World War II as well. Let's see. Yeah, so let's see. This is talking about Knut Wicksell. What did he play? Let's see. Okay, here we go. 69, page 69. The Swedish Social Democratic Capitalist Welfare State. Hold on one sec. developed its own economic theory and practice based on ideas from the Stockholm School of Economics. Paradoxically, the aforementioned financier Knut Wallenberg was the main financial sponsor of the institution. Founded in 1909, its original purpose was to educate economists in order to be able to modernize Sweden's economy and develop international trade. Connection between the capitalist Wallenberg and the development of social democratic economic policy can be traced to a common German inspiration. I mean, and when you think about it, the capitalist welfare state that Sweden and these other, Nordic or Scandinavian countries have developed are really the highest form of capitalism, because it's the most effective in a way, because they're trying to, neuter any type of revolutionary movement or sentiment among the working class, because they're, trying to improve the standard of livings to such an extent that it would make it, less likely for that to, come to pass, basically. So in a way, it's very smart of the capitalists to actually, develop this capitalistic welfare state. Let's see. Yeah. So Knut Wicksell, the first and founding professor of the Stockholm School of Economics. He was a very eclectic person. He was partly inspired by the classical ideas of David Ricardo and the Austrian School of Economics, both very liberal sources, but also Keynes's early writings, which recommended the state should regulate capitalism. No wonder Wicksell has been called the economist of economists. Despite his liberal roots, he concluded that a capitalist economy left to its own devices would produce recurrent devastating crisis and make the rich richer and the poor poorer. To counter this, state-regulated interest rates and monetary policy were necessary. Wicksell's theoretical specialty was interest rates, prices, and monetary policy, and he was a strong advocate of using interest rates to maintain price stability. In addition, he advocated progressive taxation to promote a more equal distribution of wealth. He was also influenced by Malthus, Malthusian. He was always talking about overpopulation. So that's kind of interesting, right? Yeah, that's page 73. The division of power. Despite almost a half century of continuous social democratic governments, capitalism has never been challenged in Sweden. The economy is firmly based on the accumulation of capital, a market economy, and private ownership of the means of production. Sweden is a capitalist state based on the rule of law, freedom of expression, and the right to organize. However, it is a special form of capitalist state. The Swedish state has been characterized by a division of power between the working class and the bourgeoisie via parliamentary mechanisms. This division of power does not mean that class struggle has ended. It is an expression of it. So this is pretty interesting. The Swedish capitalist welfare state does not solely represent the interest of capital or the working class. The state is an organization that class society establishes in order to maintain social peace and uphold the optimal conditions for its mode of production. Again, the only reason the state really exists is because of class antagonisms, right? You either can have a dictatorship of the proletariat, which is obviously, socialism, looking out for the well-being of the masses with a, centrally planned economy, completely devoid from the profit motive, or you can have a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie that's only benefiting very small, minority of the, population. And so Sweden, yes, is capitalist, but it is a particular version of that. I would argue a higher form, because again, it's talking about how capitalism has never been challenged in Sweden. The prime minister of the welfare state is not the representative of narrow capitalist interests or working class interests. It was simply a representative of current mode of production. Power accrues to the government best suited to serve, preserve, and develop existing mode of production based on the informal social contract between capital and labor. This is how a capitalist welfare state comes to exercise hegemony. As Antonio Gramsci, explained, obviously the fact of hegemony presupposes that the interests and tendencies of those groups over whom hegemony is exercised have been taken into account and certain equilibrium is established. There's nothing new, special, or controversial about the division of state power between classes. In a series of articles from 1848 to 1850, collected under the title Class Struggle in France, Marx described how the constitution of the bourgeoisie state grants political rights to the classes it exploits. So this is Marx, page 74. The comprehensive contradiction of this constitution, however, consists in the following. The classes whose social slavery the constitution is to perpetuate, proletariat, peasantry, petty bourgeoisie, it puts in possession of political power through universal suffrage, voting, right? And from the class whose old social power it sanctions, the bourgeoisie, it withdraws the political guarantees of this power, forces the political rule of the bourgeoisie into democratic conditions, which at every moment help the hostile classes to victory and jeopardize the very foundations of bourgeoisie society. From the first group, it demands that they should not go forward from political to social emancipation. From the others, that they should not go back from social to political restoration. Sweden's constitution and parliamentary system serve the same purpose. They guarantee the economic predominance of capital at the same time providing political rights to all of its citizens. While the power-sharing arrangement, class struggle is limited to dividing up the benefits from the accumulation of capital. And that, capital accumulation also results from imperialism, right? Throughout the last century, the state form became increasingly important for the management of capitalism in the core. What's more, this state form, because the owner infrastructure, institutions, even means of production, the capitalist welfare state developed a significant public sector employing many people, a fact that would help to secure his existence. Here we go. So this is super important. It's important to remember, however, that the emergence of this power sharing agreement and the subsequent construction of the welfare state were tied closely to the development of imperialism, a fact that is denied or dismissed by social democrats and many on the left who tend to view the class struggle from a strictly national perspective. It's always been a national, right, thing. Seen from such a perspective, reformism waged a very successful struggle. And then he's talking about imperialism and the split in socialism. And here he's quoting Lenin at the Second International. Is there any connection between imperialism and the monstrous and disgusting victory opportunism in the form of social chauvinism has gained over the labor movement in Europe? This is the fundamental question of modern socialism. Lenin's answer was affirmative. Imperialism promoted extraordinary profits and a national chauvinism, which laid the basis for what Lenin called labor aristocracy and for the success of its political representatives, the Social Democrats. Lenin described the phenomenon in his pamphlet, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. That is a great book. I have it somewhere, but I forgot where it was. I haven't read it all, but definitely recommend that as well. As this pamphlet shows, capitalism is now singled out a handful, less than 1/10 of the inhabitants of the globe, less than 1/5 at a most generous and liberal calculation of exceptionally rich and powerful states which plunder the whole world simply by clipping coupons. Capital exports yield an income of 8 to 10,000 million francs per annum, so per year, at pre-war prices and according to pre-war bourgeoisie statistics. Now, of course, they yield much more. Let's see, is this working? Oh, it is. Cool. So that's pretty interesting. Here we go. Yep. The concept of social imperialism, meaning social democracy politics at home and imperialism abroad, was widely used by Lenin, and that is again, something that Sweden engaged in, and a lot of these Nordic or Scandinavian countries as well. The Social Democrats in Denmark and Sweden did not start out revolutionary and then become reformist. Under the tutelage of German Social Democrats, these parties were born reformists. Nonetheless, they each had minority radical factions. As a result of Lehman's ideological struggle in the Second International, there was, in Sweden, as in the rest of Europe, a split between the vast majority of Social Democrats and the minority of communists, who in Sweden organized as the, not even going to try to pronounce that Swedish word, Social Democratic Left Party. The split created distrust between the two wings of the Swedish labor movement. The Social Democrats regarded the communists as traitors to their nation because of their wholehearted defense of socialism in one country, the Soviet Union. The communists, in turn, considered the Social Democrats to be class traitors because they cooperated with capital. I would, if I had been in that position, I can almost without hesitation say that I would have been siding with the communists and not with the Social Democrats. Where do you stand on that split? There is no doubt that the organizational split strengthened the position of the Social Democrats in Parliament. First, it sent a signal that the Social Democrats were unequivocally committed to reforms with the capitalist system, again, just wanting to make these tweaks around the edges to try to have a capitalist system that benefited, people in the imperial core, the home country, having a strong welfare state, a social safety net, but wanting to keep capitalism in place, while the more radical elements, the communists, etc., wanted to get rid of capitalism, completely and institute socialism or work towards communism. Second, the fear radical forms of socialism helped convince the bourgeoisie to accept the existence of social democrats governments as a lesser of two evils, as I was talking about earlier, kind of as a way to, preserve the gains that they had made, because, revolution's probably not going to be good for the bourgeoisie and the capitalist bottom line. Following their partying with the radical left, the Social Democrats would play a leading role in Swedish politics. With the exception of 4 years, they would control government from 1921 to 1976. So the Social Democrats have played a huge role in, modern day Swedish politics for decades at this point. And this is something I'd mentioned earlier, the role that the Social Democrats and how they were linked to the, trade union movement as well. So the, the Social Democrats, quote, repeatedly advocated a general interest over and above the struggle of individual groups of workers for better working conditions. Throughout this period, in fact, the Social Democrats often stood with employers on the issues of wage rates. When the employers said that a wage reduction was unavoidable, the Social Democratic representatives in the unions often supported them. So Social Democrats not always going to side with the best interest of the workers. In fact, could say maybe more often than not, they're going to, side with capital, the capitalist, overlords. And then he's talking about, the economic crisis of the 30s that was able to kind of provide a opening for a big breakthrough for the Social Democrats to, kind of implement these social welfare kind of policies that they wanted to implement, whether it was, in Northwestern Europe or the, US under, FDR and the New Deal, for example. Let's see. Previously noted, Social Democratic econ policy, this is page 79, is based on the idea of a third way, not naked capitalism and the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, but also not communism and the dictatorship of the proletariat. Instead, a political system where the working class and capital must work together to avoid mutually destructive confrontations, must try to achieve a high employment rate and maximum productivity. To achieve these goals, conflict between labor and capital must resolve peacefully in a fixed institutional framework. That's pretty interesting. The third way, right? And then this is a interesting table between industrial disputes in Sweden between 32 and 36. So for example, 1929, there were 180 disputes, 13,000 workers, 667 days lost versus 1936, there was only 60 disputes, totaling 4,000 workers and 438 days lost. And then this was something I found very interesting that I didn't know about Sweden. Either was their complicity during World War II in enabling the Nazis to commit the atrocities that they did. So here we go. And then he's also, Torkel Lawson's talking about the kind of principal contradiction during World War II between the Axis powers and the Allies, and how that had a decisive impact on all other contradictions in the world, and thus on developments in Sweden as well. So Sweden, claimed or said that they remained neutral during World War I and, World War II, but in the late 1930s, during the reign of Hitler and Nazism in Germany, 75% of Sweden's iron ore exports went to Germany. 1934, Hitler stated that without Swedish iron ore, Germany would not be able to wage war. So Hitler himself literally saying that without these exports that were being sent to Nazi Germany from Sweden, the Nazis wouldn't have been able to wage war. So Sweden played a pretty huge part in the Nazis' war efforts. In turn, Sweden imported German coke and coal, which were an essential energy source. Germany's payment for Swedish iron during the war were made partly with gold stolen from Belgium, the Netherlands, and Jews in occupied Europe, all melted down to avoid detection. Think about that. So Germany was paying Sweden for this iron ore for their war efforts partly with gold that was melted and stolen down from people in Belgium and the Netherlands and the Jews in occupied Europe. Pretty fucking disgusting, right? Let's see. Here we go. In his page 83, in his article on Sweden and Nazi Germany, Louis Proeset recounts how in July 1940 an agreement was concluded allowing German troops to transit through Sweden. Again, height of Nazi and Hitlerism, right? Every month, approximately 30,000 Nazi soldiers traveled by Swedish rail to Norway and to the Eastern Front, along with 1,500 freight wagons loaded with arms and other supplies. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union in November 1940, Swedish trains transported 75,000 tons of German military equipment to the front and wounded soldiers from the front to the hospitals in Norway. Sweden also sold and leased trucks to Germany for use within Sweden. The Swedish authorities established camps in Sweden for German troops transiting and provided supplies of oil, food, etc., just as Swedish airspace was made available for German military aircraft on the way to the Soviet Union. So the level of complicity that Sweden had in helping out the Nazis and Hitler was pretty high and obviously very, very disgusting. And this is not something I had heard about or was aware of before reading this book. Was any of you aware that Sweden played a decently sized role in this? Yeah. Hello, Claudia. Hello, Propagander, and whoever else might be on here. But that's pretty messed up, right? But again, Sweden claimed to be neutral, and yet they were allowing Nazi soldiers through there. They're providing them with oil and all of these other supplies that they needed. I mean, Hitler himself was saying that they wouldn't have been able to wage war without those Swedish iron ore exports. I mean, goddamn, right? And then here we go. So in 1940, when Torgny Segerstedt, editor of the Göteborgs Handels och, I just butchered that, criticized these Swedish policies, the government confiscated 3 issues of the newspaper when Segerstedt subsequently criticized the fact that the Swedish army commander Olaf Thornell had received Grand Cross of the Order of the German Eagle, along with a letter from Hitler and Ribbentrop. The newspaper was once again confiscated, and Segerstedt was called before King Gustav V to receive a reprimand. So literally, the Swedish army commander Olaf Thornell received the Grand Cross, the Order of the German Eagle, with a letter from fucking Hitler. And as this editor of this newspaper called that out, government confiscated the newspapers there in 1940. Jesus Christ. Here we go. So this is kind of interesting. Page 84, in sympathy for the devil, neutral Europe, and Nazi Germany in World War II, Christian Leitz describes the social democratic Hansen government as follows. Again, this is during World War II. In view of the continued Swedish supplies to the Third Reich, as we just referenced and talked about, it's not surprising that relations between Sweden and allies remain characterized for the rest of the war by suspicion and anger on the part of the allies and nervousness over post-war trade prospects among the Swedes. Although by 1944, Germany was evidently losing the war, Sweden continued to make a vital contribution to the German war effort. Now, why exactly, would they be doing that? Obviously, it was, benefiting them. Otherwise, why do that? In September 1944, Churchill brought the attitude of the Swedes to the point when he accused them of calculated selfishness, which had distinguished them in both wars against Germany. Let's see. Despite increasing pressure from allies to stop trading with Germany, Sweden continued to export iron and ball bearings to the Nazis until January 1945. Jesus, man. So then this is talking about the Swedish far right a little bit. Political developments in Germany also affected Sweden. The far right generally played a greater role in Sweden than in Norway and Denmark, both before and after the Second World War. Apart from this, the inspiration for Germany, the Swedish far right had its own ideologues, such as the previously mentioned Rudolf Kjellin. The far right enjoyed support in academia amongst the bourgeoisie, as well as in military and political circles. Oh, yes. This is why I marked that page, I think. Yes. So he's talking about Per Engdahl. He's a central kind of figure in the Swedish far right back in the day. As a young man in the late 20s, he joined the Fascist Struggle Organization of Sweden, leading member of various fascist groups in the 30s. He joined the National Sweden-Germany Federation. So in 1941, saw completely on board with Hitler and what he was trying to do. Let's see. He in 1941, again, this is Per Engdahl, this Swedish far right figure from back in the day. He wrote an open letter to Prime Minister in which he suggests that Sweden become a vassal state of Germany. Again, this is during World War II, during Hitler and Nazism, arguing that Sweden cannot assert its interests politically or economically except in accordance cooperation with the dominant power in the European continent. He also wrote a book in 1941, so it's a tribute and a preface to Hitler. And then he's also obviously hugely anti-immigrant as well. And this Engdahl figure was good friends with Ingvar Fedor Kamprad, the founder of IKEA. Okay, so the Swedish far-right figure who supported fascism, wanted Sweden to become this vassal state of Germany. He was a fan of Hitler, etc. He was good friends with the founder of IKEA. I mean, that's kind of interesting. So this is talking about their relationship. The relationship continued after the war, and Ingdahl was one of the few people from outside the family to attend Kampard's wedding in 1950. Again, Kampard was the founder of IKEA. Kampard only left the new Swedish movement in the 1950s, perhaps to avoid compromising his company IKEA. Kampard's membership became public knowledge in 1994 when some of Engdahl's personal letters were published in connection with his death. Kampard publicly regretted his membership in the new Swedish movement. In an interview on Swedish television, August 2010, Harvey insisted that Per Engdahl was a great person. Again, the person who admired Hitler. Founder of IKEA thought he was a great person. Let's see. And then, and then it's talking about, obviously, Germany lost the Second World War, and then kind of Sweden to a certain extent. Been listening. Oh, yeah. Problem, wicked bastard. I'm totally happy to share. I'm glad you're getting something out of this. I find this topic super, super interesting. Numbers crunching. Yo, hello, Claudia, Propagander. Thanks, everybody and anybody, for jumping on and listening to me ramble on as I do about this, but I just find this book and this topic really just fascinating and interesting. And again, a lot of this is very new information to me that I've not been exposed to until kind of diving in to this book. So this page 88, like I said, obviously Germany lost World War II. They were huge, important trading partner with Sweden, as we had just been detailing the German war effort. As Hitler himself said, wouldn't have been able to wage war without the help of Sweden. But Europe obviously lost. And then these European countries, the rest of the world were kind of, carved up, rebuilt on these American terms vis-a-vis the Marshall Plan. So that's kind of interesting. And then also the Bretton Woods Accord, right? Which made the US dollar the global currency. And how also at that time, then the United States established 800 military bases in 177 countries overseas, which obviously allows the U.S. empire still to this day to basically intervene anywhere in the world where they think they need to, and we see that happening time and time again, unfortunately. Let's see. And then it's talking about the U.S. wanted free trade, put pressure on these older European colonial powers to decolonize in order to open up Asia and Africa for U.S. and capital exports, while Latin America was to remain into America's very own private backyard. Is that the Monroe Doctrine, I believe, right? India became independent in 1947 from, British colonialism. Let's see. This was not out of any sympathy for colonized people. The U.S. was no friend of decolonization at any price. Here, this is really interesting. Decolonization was only welcome when the newly independent countries were to be ruled by regimes that guaranteed U.S. access to their raw materials, cheap labor, and markets. The American position on decolonization was characterized by two things. One, demanding decolonization in the context of the contradiction between the U.S. and the old colonial powers. So opening it up to free trade for U.S. capital, these multinational corporations to come in and exploit the people and the resources there. Two, making sure that the government of the newly independent countries fit in with the USA's economic, strategic, and political plans in the context of the contradiction between the USA and the socialist bloc. And then they're talking about how the British led a barbaric colonial war against Malaya and benefited from foolish U.S. support because the Malayan liberation movement was led by communists. So again, the United States was for decolonization as long as it, fit their, geopolitical interests, basically. And then it's talking about the principal contradiction in the first 2 decades following the Second World War was the contradiction between the USA and the socialist bloc. And then also that's pretty interesting too. It's not just the USA that was, strengthened heavily through World War II and how they were able to, develop very rapidly in the United States during that time, but also the Soviet Union saw a real boom as a result of the Second World War and how they were able to industrialize their country very, very rapidly and quickly. One of the quickest kind of industrial transformations that's ever happened, along with probably what's going on in China currently, right? And then it also mentions how in 1949 that China had their socialist revolution, which is thankfully still going strong there. 1/3 of the world system was part of a socialist bloc detached from the reach of Western capital. To counter this threat, U.S. hegemony, NATO was established and cold and hot wars were launched to keep the socialist bloc in check. That stuff, unfortunately, is still very much going on today. And Torkel Lassen, the end of that paragraph, talks about how those contradictions between the U.S. and these socialist blocs were critically important to Sweden's post-war development. So Sweden benefited from having intact production apparatus and access to large-scale export markets in Europe because they remained neutral during the Second World War, even though that's not true. We've seen how they were, working in concert with the Nazis and Hitler. But maybe perhaps as a result of that, they're, these manufacturing, these production points were left intact. And as a result, companies such as Volvo, Saab, Husqvarna, they make like chainsaw stuff like that. They were able to expand rapidly. Sweden quickly adapted to the New World Order, taking part in the U.S. Marshall Plan for the reconstruction in Europe and becoming a member of OECD. I have to write that down. I'm not sure. Do I have a pen handy? Yes, I do. OECD. Does anybody? Organization for Economic. I don't know. I wrote it down, but not sure exactly what that one looks for. Bias a Kofi. Kofi. Let's see. In the power period, the Social Democrats were firmly in power in Sweden with majority governments and enjoying good relations with the trade unions and capital alike. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Swedish neo-colonialism. I don't know. We'll see if I get through 20 more pages. If not, I might have to do a second one of these on my channel and maybe come back on here. Again, thank you, Independent Left News, for letting me jump on your YouTube. I believe it's also streaming on Twitch, and they had mentioned one other one. Let's see. The old form of colonialism had lost its legitimacy and utility, so i.e. direct administrative and military rule over colonies increasingly came to represent a financial burden for European powers. Imperialism changed character, it became neocolonialism, switching from direct violent exploitation of colonialism to the market-driven exploitation neocolonialism in the form of unequal exchange. So this form of unequal exchange that Torkel Lassen is talking about is these, these neo-colonial colonies, the global South, we'll refer to them as that. They export raw materials, agricultural products produced by low-wage labor that is exploited in those countries. Those raw materials, agricultural products are then exported into the imperial core, and then those industrial goods were produced by relatively high wage labor in the US and Europe, and then those goods would then be sent back to the periphery. In the colonial period, Sweden had been forced to operate in the wake of the great colonial powers, especially Germany. Neocolonialism, however, provided new opportunities to acquire direct economic and political influence in Asia and Africa. This is a very interesting and kind of diabolical example. So here we go. One example of this was LAMCO, the Liberian American Swedish Minerals Company. 1955, LAMCO discovered one of the world's largest and cleanest deposits of iron ore in Mount Nimba in Liberia in West Africa. The ore was easily accessible just below ground level. No underground mine shaft or tunnels were necessary. This is page 92 for reference. All that was required to scrape the surface and start digging. LAMCO consisted of Marcus Wallenberg Stockholm and Sklida Bank, Skanksa Cement, Centab, Atlas Copco. I've heard of Atlas Copco before. I believe they make like a construction equipment or something like that, right? Nordstrom Limbarner and Gransberg. The Swedish investors owned 75% of LAMCO. The American Bethlehem Steel Corporation, the remaining 25%. So it's just this big kind of conglomerate of these various kind of Swedish capital interests, basically, along with the American Bethlehem Steel Company that comprised LAMCO, again, the Liberian American Swedish Mineral Company, created in 55. Exports began in 63 after LAMCO built a 270-kilometer railway from the mine to the coastal town of Buchanan, where LAMCO established a new port, drawing on experience with the ports of Narvik, Savartan, and Axiolo Sound in Sweden. This would be a very interesting language to learn, it sounds like. A total of $250 million was invested in the project. In the investment phase, 11,600 people were employed in the construction work. The mine made Liberia the world's largest iron ore supplier in the 1970s. According to contemporary media accounts, a little Folkhelm, again, the Folkhelm idea was kind of creating this, social welfare state, basically, in Sweden, was established in Liberia in connection with the mining site, complete with safe roads, modern homes, schools, hospitals, supermarkets, recreation facilities, even a police station courthouse. Locals worked at the mine, but the management, skilled workers, and technicians recruited in Sweden attracted by the high wages and low taxes. During the production phase, around 15,000 people worked at LAMCO in Liberia. In Sweden, it was presented as a successful example of a development project in a poor African country. I mean, yeah, it sounds like it was portrayed in Sweden as like, wow, look how great these people of Sweden are. They're doing this development project in Liberia. They're really helping out the poor African people there. The Swedish people and the Swedish government really deserve to pat themselves on the back for this LAMCO endeavor in Liberia. However, the progressive image cracked, page 93, in 1966 when Swedish television aired the documentary Black Week in Nimba. The film tells the story of a strike at LAMCO, and the Swedes are portrayed as racist neocolonialists. And from what this worker, this local Liberian worker says, I think that's pretty accurate. Let's see. The following year, another strike broke out. The Liberian government deployed the army to protect LAMCO's property and the Swedish management. President Tubman declared the strike illegal, and workers identified as strike leaders were arrested and later fired. Sayak Jan Kron Nayeskor, one of the workers, recounted his experience at LAMCO. I was taught mechanical technology, welding, electricity, iron ore handling, plant operations, and many other technical skills. After the 9-month intensive training, we graduated and we were assigned to LAMCO. Our group was part of the Liberianization scheme. We were supposed to replace the European/American expatriate employees. However, when all the Liberian crews took over the operations of the control room, amenities, check this out. So amenities such as the drinking water cooler, icebox, refrigerator, toilet facility, portable toilet, etc. removed from the station. We had to call for relief to get a drink of water and use the toilet. So when the American and European expatriates were in Liberia working in this LAMCO control room, they had drinking water, they had a refrigerator, they had a toilet. But when the Liberian workers took over for these people, all that stuff was taken away. Pretty disgusting, right? Seems a little bit unequal. When I left LAMCO in December 68 to come to the US, I was earning 40 cents per hour, whereas the expatriates that were replaced were making somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,500 to $3,000 US. That back in 1968, that was a massive amount of money, and yet this person was only getting paid 40 cents per hour. So 8 hours a day, what is that? $3.20? I mean, that is just ridiculous. In addition, their benefits packages included 1 month paid vacation, free housing in the company's residential area, healthcare benefits, the use of the company's supermarket, private school for their children, mess hall, recreational privileges, etc. Benefits provided for Liberian workers were substandard, at best inferior. Wow. And here we go. Also, so, Sweden is maybe looking out to protect their environment in the Swedish homeland, looking out for the well-being of the environment and the people there. Not so much with LAMCO and what they were doing in Liberia, unfortunately. This is that same former employee. Whatever arrangement or agreement LAMCO and the Liberian government had, unfortunately did not include the protection of the Atlantic Ocean, the environment, nor even the safety and health of the people. LAMCO is given carte blanche, so like, go ahead, do whatever you want, basically. LAMCO was given carte blanche to dump the waste from the iron ore into the ocean. Over the years, several individuals who once worked in the LAMCO environment contracted lung-related illnesses and eventually died. I suspect some of these deaths would be attributed to the poor environmental conditions they worked in. I mean, I would think so. I mean, they're dumping all of these byproducts and waste from this, mining process into the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, that's probably going to cause some long-term health consequences for the environment and the people that live there. So, Sweden has this, awesome capitalist welfare state at home, but look at what they did to the people in Liberia. Look at how LAMCO treated them. It's really disgusting and despicable. And then this goes into talking about Patrice Lumumba, this great African revolutionary he was the first leader of the newly independent, newly decolonized Congo. He was a staunch, anti-imperialist. And, it talks about, again, what we talked about earlier, Congo had become basically the personal property of the Belgian King Leopold II at the Berlin Conference in 1884 with Sweden's support, right? Ever since it was colonized, had been exploited and tortured. We showed those really graphic and just unimaginable horrors that the Belgian people under King, Leopold II's orders perpetrated against the Congolese people. Let's see. Yeah. So Lumumba parents were, page 97, were poor peasants, but he succeeded in getting an education as a clerk at a post office in 58. He's one of the founding members of the movement National Congolese, which managed to unite the various ethnic groups in the country to demand independence from Belgium. Lumumba was inspired by Kwame Nkrumah. Is that how you say Kwame Nkrumah? I need I need to get me some of his books too. Ghana's first president after independence in 1957, a prominent anti-colonial politician theorist. He met Nkrumah at the Pan-African Conference in Ghana in 1958, and they became close friends, both political and personal. In June 1960, Lumumba was elected the first prime minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo after his socialist-oriented party won a large majority in the elections with a mandate to form a post-independence government. And then we have the Belgian king at the time, King Bedouin, giving a speech in which he praised Belgian colonialism. Again, the colonialism that led to the death, often brutal death, of 10 million people in the Congo. The Belgian king in 1960 was still praising it. He was talking about the genius of his predecessor, King Leopold II. Again, okay, just for some more reference, in case you weren't listening when we first talked about this. This is what the King of Belgium in 1960 was praising. He was saying King Leopold was a genius. Look, that's what he was praising. The King of Belgium in 1960 was praising the genius of King Leopold. Literally cutting off limbs, murdering people if they were not able to meet the quotas. 10 million people died as a result of this, but the Belgian king in 1960 was praising this. And again, this one in particular, I mean, it's all really egregious, disgusting, kind of beyond words, honestly. And when a man sits on a low platform looking at dismembered small foot and small hand. They belonged to his 5-year-old daughter, who was later killed when her village did not produce sufficient rubber. So that is who the Belgian king in 1960, he was still praising that. I mean, Jesus Christ, dude. Whew. So this is the King Bedouin of Belgium, 1960, June 30th. Don't compromise the future with hasty reforms, and don't replace the structure that Belgium hands over to you until you are sure you can do better. Don't be Don't be afraid to come to us. We remain by your side and give you advice. Jesus Christ. And this is how Patrice Lumumba, again, the first prime minister of decolonized the People's Democratic Republic of Congo. Let me see. Yeah, Democratic Republic of Congo. There we go. Here's Lumumba's response to this completely just unhinged and disgusting perspective from this really just disgusting figure of King Bedouin. So this is Lumumba. For this independence of the Congo, all the being proclaimed today by agreement with Belgium, an amicable country on which we are on equal terms, no Congolese worthy of the name will ever be able to forget that it was by fighting that has been won, a day-to-day fight, an ardent and idealistic fight, a fight in which we were spared neither privation nor suffering, and for which we gave our strength and our blood. Look at what it just showed, right? We are proud of the struggle of tears, of fire, and of blood to the depths of our being, for it was a noble and just struggle and indispensable to put an end to the humiliating slavery which was imposed on us by force. And Lumumba, he was a staunch anti-colonialist, and he was, as Torkel Lawson talks about, he was determined to detach the Congo from Belgian neocolonialism, and as a result of that, he paid for it with his life. He only survived 7 months as president. And then so basically Belgium was Belgium in the US, or just, I think it was maybe just Belgium. Let's see, working behind the scenes for this. So this copper-rich region, Katanga province, led by Moises Tshombe, declared its independence. Tshombe acted in coordination with Belgium. Belgium sent 6,000 elite soldiers to support the secession. The aim was to ensure that Belgian mining companies could continue to operate as they had under colonialism. And then, so as a result of that, this threat to Congo's integrity, Lumumba asked the United Nations to send a peacekeeping force to the country, and this triggered a Belgian-backed military coup. He was arrested December 1st, 1961, with U.S. and Belgian assistance. United Nations troops were present at the scene, but did not intervene. And who was the head of the United Nations at that time? Who was the second Secretary General of the UN? That was, where's his name in here? It was Hammer. I had it down in here. How am I missing it? Wait, I have it up here. Why am I not looking? Dag Hammarskjöld, second United Nations Secretary General. I'm probably butchering that name, but that's who it was. He was from Sweden. He was the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time when Patrice Lumumba was asking this UN peacekeeping force to come into the country. They didn't intervene. They let Lumumba be taken by these U.S. and Belgian, backed, separatist forces, and he was assassinated. He was murdered. And so this Swedish, UN Secretary General, Hammarskjöld, I'm probably butchering that, all he did was to simply appeal to the coup makers to grant Lumumba due process. And a due process was him being murdered and chopped up into little pieces, more or less. Yeah. Lumumba's execution was carried out by a death squad under the command of a Belgian officer, Julian Gott. A Belgian police commissioner, Frans Verschuur, was in charge of the killings. Lumumba and his comrades were quickly buried, and the next day, Verschuur and another Belgian police commissioner, Gerard Sauté, along with his brother and some soldiers, returned to the graves to move the bodies as they feared the execution would be observed. And then on January 21st, the same team once again dug up the bodies, cut them into small pieces and dissolved them in sulfuric acid in an attempt to erase the trace of the atrocity. Jesus Christ. Here we go. And this is also very interesting. Let's see, we got any more? Hey, Hazza. Good to see you jump in there, man. Awesome to see on the stream. I like that little mushroom thing. That's pretty cool. Thanks for jumping on. So this wasn't just some seat of the pants type of thing. This plan to execute the first leader in independent Congo came from very high levels of the Belgian government. Let's see. In 2001, page 100, in 2001, a Belgian government report described both Belgian and American plans to kill Lumumba, including a CIA plan to poison Lumumba ordered by President Eisenhower, a plot that was later confirmed by declassified CIA documents. 2013 State Department itself confirmed that Eisenhower authorized the liquidation of Lumumba. God, that's why, yes, the American empire needs to go the way of the horse and buggy. It's the United States has never been a force for good in the world, right? Well, rumors swirled. The Belgian puppet regime of Katanga separatists waited a month before officially announcing Lumumba's death, and then they're trying to blame it by agitated villagers. I mean, Jesus Christ. As President Lumumba had hoped for UN support to safeguard the decolonization process. Obviously didn't get that at all. The UN was literally there as he was taken by these separatist forces with the backing of the Belgian and US governments. Yep. But there was no help to be found from Hammarskjöld's UN. Again, he was the Swedish UN secretary or general secretary, the second one in the history of the UN. Let's see. Here we go. King Leopold's conquests were based on violence on such a massive scale that death rate was quite unprecedented. History matters. Since the conflict that arose at independence between Patrice Lumumba and the Belgian authorities, a conflict was transported to one between Lumumba and Hammarskjöld. Was a conflict about the meaning of history. Dag Hammarskjöld may not have appreciated the depths of Belgian self-deception over the bloody history of the Congo. East-West obsessions during the Cold War add another layer to the disputes over the legacy of the colonial past. Lumumba intended, this is from Ludo de Witt, Lumumba intended to jettison the dead weight of colonial heritage and combat any neo-colonial designs in the country. And again, for that reason, he paid for it with his life. The aims of the United Nations Security General were a liberal kind of peace and maintaining public order. Yep. So didn't get any help from the Swedish, UN Secretary General. None whatsoever. Here we go. This is also pretty interesting. Here we go. Hammarskjöld and his right-hand man, the American Ralph Bunche, had apparently concluded that Lumumba posed a greater threat to peace and law and order than the separatists in Katanga did. When the killings of Lumumba and his advisors came to the attention of the UN Security Council to ask Hammarskjöld to investigate what happened, he initially refused, and the Security Council to repeatedly insist the investigation be conducted. When one finally was, it went nowhere. Nothing was clarified. No one was punished for the execution of Lumumba. It would seem that Hammarskjöld did not recognize the contradiction between the human face of capitalism at home in Sweden and the brutality of imperialism in the Congo. You're probably not going to be able to have that human face of capitalism, that highly developed capitalist welfare state, without the brutality of imperialism in the Congo or anywhere else in the world, right? The profit rates of Belgium investments in the Congo were two to three times higher than investments in Europe. Belgium's largest company, the Société Générale de Belgique Financial Group, received 40% of its profits from its investments in the Congo. That is something Belgium did not want to have to give up. And they didn't, at least at that time, right? Let's see. Yeah, and then finally, kind of Hammarskjöld realized that it was Belgian interests that constituted the primary threat to Congo's peace and free enterprise. He decided to intervene. On his way to negotiations in September 61. His airplane crashed. He died along with the other 4 other persons on board. Kind of some weird circumstances surrounding that plane crash, not knowing what or how it happened. And then there's some evidence that Belgian mining interests were responsible. And again, I wouldn't think that is out of the realm of possibility, frankly, right? Although the dirty work would have been carried out by local accomplices. Pretty interesting. Yeah. So Lumumba's death, the result of his efforts to free Congo from Belgian imperialism, and again, Sweden had been a huge supporter of Belgian imperialism in Africa and Congo in particular. When Hammarskjöld finally turned against Belgium's conduct in the Congo, he became almost as unpopular as Lumumba among the Belgian imperialists and settlers. Here we go. The UN system's lack of interest or ability to confront, is probably both, right? To confront the logic of imperialism left the Congo with the same economic structure sustained by brutal violence as had existed under colonialism. Belgium's rubber terror turned into coltan terror. King Leopold's ghost continues to haunt the Congo. Yes, and this is particularly egregious to me. In Sweden, Hammarskjöld received a posthumous Nobel Peace Prize, and John F. Kennedy called him the greatest statesman of our century. Lumumba did not even get a grave. Really sad. Let's see. Oh, here's Che. Nice little quote from Che denouncing the imperialist exploitation in the Congo. I would like to refer specifically to the painful case of the Congo, unique in history of the modern world, which shows how, with absolute impunity, with the most insolent cynicism, the rights of the people can be flouted. The direct reason for all this is the enormous wealth of the Congo, which the imperialist countries want to keep under their control. I think he summed it up pretty well there, frankly. Hey y'all. Hey Mayville Jones. Good day, everybody. Nice to see Mayville in there, and Haza, a couple familiar names from my channel. Nice. Nightbot. How do you get like a bot's like posting stuff? That's kind of interesting. Very interesting. Okay, back to this. So I'm actually, it's kind of since I'm streaming on Independent Left News' channel, I can't see the comments on my little StreamYard thing, but Independent Left News, being the very technology savvy person that they did, sent me this link. Indie Master of the Bots. I mean, they are definitely very up on all this different forms of like technology, and they said they've learned a lot through the Discord. So I'm gonna have to jump on that and get a little more up to date with some of this new tech stuff. But that's pretty cool that, you know, I was able to jump on this channel and do the stream on here, and appreciate Independent Left News for letting me do that. Definitely check out Independent Left News. You're probably already familiar with their work, given that you're watching this on their platforms. Yep. And then so you know, there's still diamonds being extracted from, and other minerals, you know, that are important for the production of smartphones, that are extracted from the Congo under the same conditions as colonial Congo. So what has changed really? Still child labor, brutal militias, still secure high profit rates. And then also, this is kind of an interesting point, page 106. Congo is also a source of the minerals required for the batteries that store energy produced by windmills and solar panels, and which will be in high demand for electric cars. It is estimated that lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles alone require up to 43% of the cobalt and 50% of the lithium produced globally. Green capitalism will be no better than fossil fuel capitalism. It does kind of seem that way, right? Especially for the people in the countries like Congo, whose resources and people are continuing to be, you know, exploited for green capitalism. Let's see. And then he goes on to talk about Olaf Palme. He was from a bourgeoisie family. His father was a wealthy CEO. Mother was an aristocrat who owned large landed estates. But he kind of broke out from the filmy mold a little bit. He eventually became the prime minister of Sweden, but he was actually assassinated outside of a movie theater, walking home, I think, with his wife. And then also just the contradictions to, let's see, so he was critical towards certain aspects of the U.S. He had seen and been upset by some of the racism he observed, you know, against Black people while he, you know, studied in the U.S. He became, you know, kind of a critic of the Vietnam War. He led the Swedish government's criticism of U.S. aggression in Vietnam, which is obviously a good thing. Let's see. Oh, that's pretty cool too, actually, page 109. In January 69, Sweden became the first Western country to recognize North Vietnam. I mean, that's cool, but it would have been a lot better if they maybe had sent resources or support to combat, the American imperialist war effort in the country. But words and gestures, that's also good, I suppose. In his 1972 Christmas address, Palm compared the B-52 bombing of Hanoi to the atrocities of fascism. Nixon called Palm, as former President Richard Nixon, a Swedish arsehole, and brought the U.S. ambassador home for consultations. However, the situation was not so bad as to interfere with the covert military cooperation between Sweden and the USA, and the U.S., however, which continued unperturbed. That's a good word, unperturbed. Officially, Sweden was neutral. However, as early as 1952, it began working with NATO. Sweden provided intelligence on Soviet activities in the Baltic and received U.S. weapons technologies in return. 1960, the United States provided Sweden with a secret security guarantee. In the event of Soviet attack, the U.S. would intervene on Sweden's side. So it's very interesting, right? So on the one hand, some actors in Sweden were actually calling out, the U.S. war, this war of aggression and imperialism in Vietnam, which is good. But then on the other hand, this contradiction also existed, where they were providing this support to NATO, even though they were supposed to be neutral, as the case were. So here we go. Page 110. As part of this collaboration, U.S. experts assisted the Swedish arms manufacturer Saab to develop the Viggen jet fighter to improve the accuracy of Swedish Polaris missiles and to partially subsidize anti-submarine weapons for the Swedish Navy. Let's see. Yep. Despite Palm's harsh anti-American rhetoric, Sweden remained in secret strategic alliance with NATO. Palm's criticism the U.S. was not grounded in historical, economic, or political analysis. The root causes of U.S. imperialism. Again, it was just like this one. Yeah, he was just saying this one act that the U.S. is doing bad, but overall, they're pretty good. We're still going to give them this covert support for NATO, even though we're supposed to be neutral. We're going to give you some, info on the USSR if we have it in the Baltic region. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, this was also pretty interesting. Here we go. This study group headed by economist Rudolf Meidner. So, hello. Lands organization, or the kind of Swedish kind of trade unionist movement, basically. And this economist Rudolf Meidner came up with this idea, as Meidner put it. We want to deprive the owners of capital of their power, which they're exercising precisely by virtue of their ownership. All experience shows that influence and control are not enough. Ownership plays a crucial role. I'd like to refer to Marx and Wigforss. I'm familiar with Marx. Wigforss, maybe some type of Swedish economist, theorist. We cannot fundamentally change society without also changing the relations of ownership. However, he wasn't necessarily saying let's get rid of capitalism. It was a little bit different than that, and even that was vehemently opposed by the kind of capitalist class within Sweden. So this proposal that was developed by Rudolf Meidner and his cohorts did not suggest the traditional nationalization of capital, which would give the state ownership of the means of production, let alone a planned economy where economic priorities would be decided politically by the state. Again, that's kind of the hallmark of any socialist country, is the centrally planned, rationally planned economy, a planned economy that is designed to meet the needs of the many, as opposed to a capitalist one where the profit motive reigns supreme, and making more money, increasing profits, that's all that matters. The people, the well-being of the people, and the natural world be damned. Meitner's idea was to do away with private ownership of the means of production without concentrating economic power in the state institutions, and with the trade unions and their members' position that need to be strengthened in relation to capital. As such, it was not a break with the logic of capitalism. Sweden was to continue as a market economy, both domestically and internationally. Sweden would remain part of the capitalist world market, just as before. It would be a more democratic capitalism with the trade unions at the helm, a kind of people's capitalism. There's no such. Oh my goodness. I mean, it seems like maybe Rudolf Meitner's heart was in the right place, but I don't think necessarily his mind was, because there's no such thing as a people's capitalism as long as you have the profit motive there. Even if you have a worker co-op, let's say in the defense industry, the people there, because the profit motive is still the prime motivating factor, they're going to be lobbying their governments, their different constituencies for more war. That's why we need to get rid of the profit motive. It turned out that regular trade union members supported the plan to an extent that surprised even Meitner and Hedberg. At this moment, the trade union movement was convinced to support the plan. Let's see, but here you go. The Social Democratic Party came out against this plan, even though it wasn't obviously as radical as I would like or someone like. It would have been a improvement for the people in Sweden. But it soon became clear that the Social Democratic Party, which had spent the past century pursuing peaceful class cooperation, could not endorse a proposal that called into question the private ownership of the means of production. As the Social Democrats saw things, was the role of the trade union movement to take care of the interests of the working class, while the Social Democrats, as a people's party and as a government, was to manage the division of power between labor and capital. When Olof Palme, again, that was the prime minister, he had other roles in the Swedish government before becoming prime minister. When he received Meitner's proposal, he initially thought it was only a discussion paper. When he learned it was the official policy of the National Trade Union, his first comment was, "They went beyond my wildest imagination." To the Social Democratic leadership, Palme made it clear that this is hell, but it's hell we have to go through. However, due to the long-standing close relations with the trade unions, the Social Democrats could not simply reject an important proposal passed by a large majority at the LO Congress. That's the kind of trade union, right? Let's see, David Harvey section on Sweden, a brief history of neoliberalism. We're checking out for economic stuff. Oh, thank you for posting that. Never met them. Looks like a comment from Twitch. That's pretty cool. So Palme became Olaf, kind of a good name. Olaf became prime minister in 1969. Seemed that the economic growth and expansion of the Swedish welfare state would continue as in previous decades. However, due to the international oil crisis and subsequent stagflation in the early 1970s, it became difficult to implement new welfare reforms. Oh, excuse me. And then Palme lost the election in 1976. Again, that was that 44-year period that the Social Democrats had been in control of, Sweden's government since, what is that? Yeah, 44 years, so long, long time. Let's see. Here we go. In 1978, the Joint Working Group presented a modified compromise proposal which limited Meitner's original plan to companies of more than 500 employees. Furthermore, the funding should come not just from profits, but also from wage earners' salaries. The question of the ownership of the means of production had disappeared completely, as the working group's introduction made clear. The proposal is not going to fundamentally challenge the economic and political environment in which businesses operate. So just again, very, very small tweaks around the edges while still leaving the capitalist system completely intact, and profit motive would still be reigning supreme. Let's see. According to Miner, again, that was one of the architects of this proposal. The new proposal had nothing in common with the original except its name. Oh, that's sad. And again, the original did not go nearly far enough, in my opinion. The proposal got rid of any mandatory profit-based transfer shares to the funds. The core mechanism for changing property relations was completely gone. The purpose of the funds, whose capital now consists of joint contribution from capital and employees, was to buy shares on the stock exchange just like any other investor. Oh my goodness. But the bill, yeah, so here we go. Finance minister concluded, page 116. The employee funds are not an instrument intended to do away with capitalism. Employee funds are one of the many corporate tools that the democratic labor movement employs to make life better for people in our country. The funds are a way to strengthen the common interest concerning work, production, and savings, which has existed in our country for a long time. Thus, the introduction of employee fund is a reform in the traditional spirit of social democratic reform. And I think that is actually as far as I have gotten in this wonderful little book, a little bit over halfway, and just a little bit more background on this author for quick reference, because his I don't think I can, because I'm not able to, unfortunately, see any of the comments in my little StreamYard browser here. I got to figure out maybe how to do that in the future, because the comments aren't showing up in my little StreamYard feed. I have to go to this restream thing to see the comments on here, something that Independent Left News sent me the link for. But I'm not able to highlight comments from Twitch, at least right now, unfortunately, as far as I know. But I wanted to share real quick a little bit of background of this author of this really amazing and insightful book, Torkel Lawson. Could definitely be butchering their name. Let's see, and here we go. Here we go. A little bit on Torkel Lawson, a real radical revolutionary in the most real sense of that term, it seems. So look at this. In the 70s and 80s, Torkel Lawson was a member of a clandestine communist cell which carried out a series of robberies in Denmark, netting very large sums, which were then sent to various national liberation movements in the Third World. Following their capture in 1989, Torkel would spend 6 years in prison. In 2016, Lawson's book, Debt to Global Perspective, was released in Denmark. In it, he explains how he sees the world political situation today and his thoughts about the future. And I forget there's actual name of this group, but like, how amazing is that? Carrying out these robberies, getting a bunch of money, and then sending it to these national liberation movements in the Third World. Like, my goodness. That probably would also be an amazing book. The Imperial Mode of Living, review, comments, and supplements. Principal contradiction, some thoughts on COVID-19, all kinds of good stuff. And also, the book that I'm referencing now. And then, and then let's see. This was also kind of interesting too. So oftentimes we have people in the United States, I don't know if this is a uniquely US phenomenon, but oftentimes people will really talk about the Nordic model, or how Sweden and these countries are so great and things that we should be emulating. And it really shows their social chauvinism, their Western chauvinism, because they're not really anti-imperialist, and they don't really see how these countries have been able to generate their wealth, through that biopolitics of death, where life is exported and extracted through imperialism, and then those resources, uh, you know, are sent back to the imperial core, which enriches the imperial core and then leaves nothing but death and destruction behind. So this is from 2020. Bernie Sanders AOC support the Nordic model, which features robust health and social welfare systems, one that Finland leaders calls the American dream. I mean, again, the the Swedish social welfare state obviously would be a improvement for the for the people in the United States, but it obviously would still have hugely disastrous consequences for people outside of the imperial core. That's why socialism is the solution, and just kind of super important to keep in mind because of the contradictions that will always be there under capitalism, right? That's why Bernie, AOC, um, they're they're not socialists, and the countries that they want the U.S. to become aren't socialist. So that makes sense, right? Um, and then yeah, I have a here. Let me do this one real quick too. A tweet from Bernie, little Bernie boy. Where are we at? Here we are. So this is a tweet from Bernie, July 8th. So a couple months ago. New parents in Sweden are guaranteed 480 days of paid leave, 80% of normal wages during that time. So obviously, the capitalist welfare state in Sweden is very highly developed compared to what we have here in the imperial core in the U.S. But again, we should not be emulating. We should not be wanting to become Sweden or these other Nordic or Scandinavian countries. We need to throw off the shackles of capitalism and work towards becoming and developing a socialist country. That's the only way that we're going to be able to improve the material well-being of the don't buy a Saab. Yeah. Sweden wanted to bomb. Yep, I saw that. Sweden wanted to bomb Afghanistan to market their fighter jet. I did. Yep, I remember seeing that. Yep, completely true from WikiLeaks. I remember seeing that. Yep, that's why when you still have the profit motive in there, it's going to lead to disastrous consequences. Like Hazza pointed out in the chat, how Sweden wanted to bomb Afghanistan to market their fighter jets. Again, so even if that company who was making those fighter jets was a worker-run co-op, if that profit motive was still there, then they would still be wanting to bomb people in Afghanistan, because then they would be able to sell more planes. They would still be wanting to drop bombs wherever they could in the world, because they would be able to sell more planes and increase their rate of profit. That's why we need to get rid of the capitalist system and institute a socialist one, have a rationally, centrally planned economy that looks after the well-being and the interest of the vast majority, have a dictatorship of the proletariat. And again, you can't have any type of real international working class solidarity under a capitalist system, right? But I think I'm 90s. I remember Saab ads bragging they had fighter jet heritage. 90s, I think. Yeah, I I believe it, right? I believe it. But I'm gonna end the chat here. Thanks everybody for jumping on, hanging out. Again, thank you for Independent Left News for setting this up and helping me figure out the little technical issues I was having. Super appreciative for all their help and guidance with this. And thank you for again, giving me the platform to come on here and ramble for a couple hours about this really interesting and insightful book. And again, I think, like Bernie and AOC, are they not aware of the type of history of Sweden or, let's say, Belgium, for example? Or are they just conveniently ignoring it? Either way, I think it's really, important to have these type of discussions and to go, deeper on these topics and to learn more about countries and to hear perspectives you're not going to hear presented in the mainstream media or discourse. And if you want to find more of my stuff, you see the scrolling banner down there. Check out my channel, find me on Twitter, and like this video, share it, definitely subscribe and support independent left news as much as possible. And hope y'all have Saab 900 Turbo 16S UK 1988. Best show on YouTube. Keep it up, dude. I appreciate the kind words, Mayville Jones. That warms my heart. I'm probably blushing a little bit on the inside, and I think so again, I'm about halfway through this. So we've gotten up to maybe what the early or late 70s, early 80s, and there's still a whole lot to get to in this. So I'll probably be doing a part 2 of this, either on this channel or mine in the future, just because I find it really, really interesting. Yes, definitely. Yeah, no problem, Huzzah. Thank you. Yeah, definitely thanks for Indy for being a supporter of my channel and all these other great channels and sites and people out there. They provide a really wonderful and much needed service. I mean, just all the work that they do, combining all these stories and everything, and how willing they are to help me. And I think, anybody else that wants to, spread kind of independent, analysis and messages. So they're really doing the Lord's work for sure. Who else talks about books and Marxism like this? Not many. Book streams are great. Yeah, I do. I find it really, really interesting. Hold on one sec. Yeah, because I got some other books you'll probably be seeing me chat about in the future. Let's see. I got a bunch that are on the chopping block here. So I got a little bit of a break. Esha's late night with there you go. Got a little bit of break from grad school currently, which I'm very thankful for. I actually don't know exactly when I go back to school. Not really worried about it at this point. But first book by Joseph Stalin that I've read, at least, Dialectical and Historical Materialism and Other Writings. I'm about 30 pages in, and it's only a little over 100. So I think this would be really interesting to have a chat about as well. And hopefully I need to create the link and confirm. I should be having a conversation with Dr. Let me look up their name. Dr. So, well, I'll show this real quick just to show who I'm hopefully be having on Friday at 9:30. I think 9 or 9:30 Pacific Standard on my channel. So I should be having an interview with this person next Friday morning-ish Pacific Standard Time. Create a link soon, get it out to them, and then post it on my channel. So with the idea of talking about communism, the USSR, and Joseph Stalin in particular. So he's a professor of economics, communist. So I mean, he's he's a man after my own heart there. So hopefully we'll be having a chat with him on Friday. So I think that should be really interesting and insightful. And I had a pretty lengthy, honestly, discussion, I don't know, argument with my partner when we were in the car the other day about capitalism and socialism. And I would really like to pick that doctor's brain about a few things that came up during that discussion to get their perspective on it, particularly the idea of what role does repression or authoritarianism or violence play in upholding a socialist society. Is it in fact any better than the repression and violence that takes place under a capitalist system? I had the perspective that yes, the suppression of counter-revolutionaries, reactionaries, groups or forces that were trying to actively overthrow a socialist movement, socialist government, those forces should be dealt with accordingly. And that is something that Mao talks about in his little red book. I did one stream of this, but I only got through like 20 pages just because there's so much to digest. So this is another one I would be probably doing another live stream on. And again, another really amazing book that I recommend you read and digest if you haven't as well. So I think that's really just the interesting kind of point of discussion and dialogue. What is violence or repression or authoritarianism? Is that justifiable the if it's working towards upholding a socialist system? I'm from the perspective that yes it is. Obviously it should be minimized as much as possible. Everybody should obviously still be able to share whatever ideas or opinions that they have. And Mao talked about in this how it's just really important to let those type of ideas get out there, but then to critique them and to criticize them for the bullshit that they are. Basically, it's the paraphrase. I don't think Mao used the word probably bullshit in here, but you get the idea. But then also more serious measures would have to be taken towards groups or people that were taking active efforts in trying to reactionary or counter-revolutionary forces that were trying to overthrow the socialist movement or government. So I think that is a really interesting point of discussion. Again, I think inherently a means to an end, depending on what that end is. I think the ends justify the means sometimes, but that's just my perspective, and I don't think everybody believes that. But I mean, revolutions aren't like a dinner party. It's going to be a messy and violent affair, because revolutions are where one class overthrows another, more or less. I've got, how much have I read of this? 100 pages, so a decent amount in. The Counter-Revolution of 1776, Slave Resistance and the Origin of the U.S. by Gerald Horne, probably my favorite historian in the U.S. at this point. His analysis and voice is just amazing. This is my first book of Dr. Horne's that I've read, and wow, it's also highly recommend that one. What is to be Done, V.I. Lenin. Started reading this a while ago. I've got maybe a fourth of the way through. Prisons Obsolete. Of course they are. Angel White Davis. Communist Manifesto. Just this little pamphlet, which is kind of cool. So I almost think like for this one, because it's less than 50 pages, maybe just do a long live stream one night or day and just to read the whole thing and comment and talk about it. And then also started the Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. And then I'd really like to get, I'm about to end it here, but I want to get this book as well. Here we go. Black Marxism by Cedric J. Oh shoot, okay, he passed away. Oh damn, dude, that sucks. But yeah, I'd like to get his book, Black Marxism. I heard some really amazing things about that. But as you can see, I got Pink Tide will continue to rise. Color revolutions are flip side of civil disobedience. Well, that was the argument. So well, and I was trying to tell my partner, who's actually one of the two Uber comrades supporting my channel on Patreon. So thank you, along with Independent Left News. But it was just, we were having this discussion, and again, my opinion is that yes, there will need to be some amount of repression or violence or authoritarianism. Obviously, you want to minimize that as much as possible, transitioning from dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, which we have now, to a dictatorship of the proletariat. There will be reactionary and counter-revolutionary forces that will need to be dealt with accordingly. Otherwise, if you don't account for those issues, then that socialist revolution, that socialist project, isn't going to last very long. So I think it's very naive to think that it would just be all rainbows and sunshines and unicorns and ponies. No, you're going to have to take into account for internal and external forces that would be trying to overthrow that socialist movement, that socialist government. And I think that's why that type of thing would need to be implemented. And she agrees, but she also doesn't think that communism is achievable in any sense. So she doesn't think people should identify as communist, because she thinks that is too utopian. She thinks there will always need to be a socialist state, because we won't be able to just develop into that kind of communist utopia where classes in the state ceases to exist. I don't know. Maybe she's right, but I want to keep thinking and fighting for that ideal, because that is the end goal, obviously. So anyways, I'm following the new Atlas commentary in Myanmar closely. It's quite an objective. I'll look at, okay, take a picture of that. I'll check that out. Wow, I think this is the longest stream I've ever done. Hopefully some people got something out of it and enjoyed it. I know I did, chatting and interacted to the extent possible. But have a good night, good day, good morning, everybody. All power to the people. Peace, much love, and thanks again to Independent Left News for letting me jump on their channel. See if we can maybe do it again in the future. Peace, much love.